Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for attending our session today. My name is Brian Tisbel, and I'm the Managing Director and the Global Head of the eDiscovery and Data Advisory Practice at Baker McKenzie. I'm based in our London office. I'm also very honored to be on the Board of Directors for the UK chapter of ACEDS, and on behalf of the board, very delighted that you're with us today. Just for those of you that don't know, the mission of the ACEDS UK chapter is to help professionals in various disciplines improve their eDiscovery knowledge and skills, advance their careers, increase their contacts, and increase their overall competency in eDiscovery, legal technology, and related fields. Before I turn over to our distinguished panelists for today, just a couple of housekeeping items that I'd like to make some announcements about. The ACEDS board has recently undergone a little bit of a reshuffle, and the legacy board members that remain are myself, James McGregor, who's the Managing Director for EMEA at Concilio, Nikki Woodfall, who is the Manager of eDisclosure and eData at Travers Smith, Emily Wiley-Ballard, who is the Manager of eDiscovery at RPC, Claire Chalkley, Vice President of Legal Services at Integrion, and Amit Pandit, who is the Director of Recruitment at AppSearch. Following a recent recruitment drive, which yielded a lot of applicants from people across the industry, and we're very, very grateful for everyone that applied. We've had much deliberation, and the ACEDS board has added 2 new board members to its ranks at the beginning of the month. So I'm very delighted to welcome Melina Efstathiou, who is the head of litigation technology at Eversedge Sutherland, and Phil Demetriou, who is the Director of International Markets at Disco. So a very warm welcome to the board to them. Today's session is on the intersection of eDiscovery and cybersecurity, and it is the first of our events for this calendar year. But we do have several sessions planned throughout the coming year, so please stay tuned for updates from us on what's to come. We will also be releasing a series of vlogs over the coming months, which will include discussions with industry leaders across the eDiscovery and legal technology space on a host of topics that are really at the top of mind for legal technology practitioners today. We've got high hopes as well of being able to host our annual Christmas party this year. We would love to be able to do that in person, but we are keeping a close eye on the government guidance, and we'll be looking to try and plan that event. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted on that. As always, if you have a topic that you think would be good for the UK ACEDS board to craft an event around, or if you're interested in speaking or sponsoring a future event, please contact any of us on the board if you'd like, and we'd be happy to consider any of your ideas. They're all very welcome. So for today's session, we will be holding questions until the end. So please do enter any questions that you may have in the chat function. I'll be monitoring those throughout the session, and we'll try to come to all of the questions that we can at the end of the session. So without further delay, I'm going to turn over the mic, if you will, to our moderator today, the very distinguished Phil Beckett. Phil is the Managing Director and European Middle East Practice Group Leader for Disputes and Investigations at Alvarez & Marsal. Phil has nearly 25 years of experience in the legal technology space, and we are delighted that he has agreed to be our moderator for today's session. So without further delay, Phil, over to you.
Thanks very much, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm going to jump straight in because we've got a packed agenda this afternoon. And to start with, I'd like to introduce the panelists on today's session. First of all, we have Winston Crone. Winston is the Chief Research Officer at Kivu Consulting, an international technology firm specializing in incident response. He's worked in IR, computer forensics, and eDiscovery for more than 20 years. In addition to cyber, Winston has also worked in many of the world's most stressful environments, including post-war Bosnia, post-genocide Rwanda, and most challengingly, as a junior solicitor in Baker McKenzie's London office. I know which one of those I'd rather not handle, Winston. Secondly, we have Ron Willis. Ron is the VP of Legal for CrowdStrike, a leading cybersecurity company, and has responsibility for litigation, compliance, and legal operations. Ron has over 15 years of in-house experience with cyber companies, and during that time has overseen both on-premise and cloud eDiscovery program build-outs. In his current role, he works directly with CrowdStrike's internal incident response team, which doubles as their eDiscovery task force. Finally, we have Paul Glass. Paul is a partner and head of cybersecurity and data breach of the UK for Baker McKenzie, and has been advising clients and leading investigations on cyber and data breach and data litigation for 15 years and technology disputes for 20 years, including large-scale global breaches covering in excess of 100 countries. Paul tries to keep up coding and hacking skills when he has the time. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you will notice that Paul is missing from the video panel at the moment. And I don't think his introductory words could be more apt. He's actually involved in a breach response right now. He has a large multinational case he's working on. He's had to jump on a call. He's desperately trying to hope that he can limit the call to 30 minutes and will look to join us as soon as he can. But in the meantime, Ron, Winston, myself will try and make up for the lacking of Paul. So where do we start with this? Well, I was trying to think about how to kick this off, and there was a post flagged to me this morning from LinkedIn that says a report by the UK government says that 2 in 5 UK firms experienced cyber attacks in 2020. 2 in 5, or 39%, and a quarter of charities have reported attacks in the past 12 months, according to the DCMS, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Support. I find this number quite low, if I'm honest, and I think that's probably low because people don't report, even if they know, and some people don't even know. The figures that we are seeing and the growing threat of cyber challenges to companies is not unexpected. Given our current working environment with people working remotely, the change in processes, the different cyber attack vectors we're seeing due to COVID themes, budget constraints and digital acceleration, never mind the increased activity in state actors and organised crime, cyber is going to be a hot issue for many people for years to come, just as it is right now. But what do we mean by cyber? Cyber means many things to many people. It's big, it's complex, and it has multiple different players with multiple different constituent parts. So to start us off, we're going to have a very quick panel discussion just on what we mean by cyber, and more specifically, a deeper look at incident response, which is the main focus of the rest of the afternoon. Ron, how would you describe cyber? Ron, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, no, I'm a liberal arts major, so I can't give you a technical definition, but from having worked in a cyber company, I would tell you from a layman's perspective, what began as antivirus, finding bad code, malware, identifying a signature, and then trying to inoculate folks, has evolved into a really broad and sophisticated array of tools and services. So from my perspective, cyber now is really, protecting everything in your digital life. It's protecting files, it's systems, connections, payloads, workloads, even containers and virtual machines. And it's not just the protecting, it's also trying to detect intrusions and then remediate if someone does get in. So really, it's this mosaic of all these different capabilities. And then on top of it, you've got services. You've got the humans who have to out-innovate and outpace adversaries who, let's face it, the bad guys just have to break in one time. The good guys have to make systems and processes, resilient, and you've got to factor in business continuity. So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, and it does involve technology, but let's just not forget it involves people too.
I think that's a very important point. That a lot of people think cyber equals IT, and it's not simply the case. The world's best systems can be undone by the stupidity of one person. So I think it is important to make sure we consider people as well. Winston, how would you define cyber, and more specifically, looking at incident response? How do you define that?
Yeah, so I come out of it where most of our clients actually have what's called cyber insurance, and the term cyber is almost drowning in the numbers of what that means. So cyber insurance that you can get would include things like social engineering, leaving a laptop on a train, clicking on the wrong link. So, you know, to go to Phil's point and to Ron's point, cyber now is just becoming anything that involves any form of digital information, which I'd actually say that probably in a year's time, cyber is just going to collapse under the weight of basically it's everything that we do, other than writing stuff on a paper and pencil. And even then it'll probably be scanned and become a cyber issue.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's going to be a fundamental business risk, and for companies facing cyber, they need to deal with it as a enterprise-wide risk and consider it in all the aspects it is. But what we're going to talk about today in more detail is the comparisons between eDiscovery and incident response, the skill sets, and how the different technologies kind of coexist and can help each other. There is obviously a flow of skills that range from eDiscovery to forensics to incident response to cyber assessments. Ron, how do you see the skill sets change for those people, and how have companies dealt with it like your own, where they've merged these practices together?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an evolution, Phil. And I would say one of the fun things about working at CrowdStrike is that I'm literally surrounded by some of the best cyber folks out there. And because our incident response team, our internal incident response team, is also our eDiscovery team, I'm getting kind of a front row seat of how these skills really do complement one another. A couple things stand out. I think the first is this incredible situational awareness you get when your forensic or incident response folks are also helping on eDiscovery, because they have a much more intimate knowledge of your network architecture, your on-prem and cloud apps, access controls, you know, all these things, because they're looking for intrusions, they're looking for internal threat actors. They're constantly monitoring all these connections and data sources. So I think by partnering with them at a minimum or embedding them in your eDiscovery team, again, you just have this amazing situational awareness. And what it translates to in my mind is ECA, or early case assessment on steroids. You know, these are folks that, you know, time is your enemy in the incident response context. If somebody's in, you have to move quickly. So I think that agility that is paramount in the incident response context can kind of bleed over into the eDiscovery use case, so that you're getting a lot more information, relevant information faster, so you can develop a strategy. It isn't like old school eDiscovery from 15 years ago, where you just cast a net, drag it all in, and then start sifting through it to find something of interest. So I think that ECA accelerator is one of the benefits of having, at a minimum, your incident response folks and your forensic folks very closely conjoined with your eDiscovery team. The flip side, and I think we have an illustration of that today with Paul getting called out, is that you may have bandwidth constraints in instances where a higher priority IR project draws away resources, and you kind of hope and pray it doesn't happen a couple days from a deadline in a big case. So I do think in an era where we're all asked to do much more with less, in an era where there's a real advantage in having, you know, cross-disciplinary teams, you know, you wear many hats. You know, we just need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, nobody waits when an IR happens. You know, it's all hands on deck, and that does have implications on eDiscovery. But I think the net benefit, honestly, is that when you combine this skill set, you really get closer to a turnkey eDiscovery solution, where you get the benefit of understanding your environment, custodians, data sources, getting to that stuff quickly. The forensic side of the house, I think, can help you optimize how you preserve in place so that you're not having to collect too much stuff. And then where legal and the classic eDiscovery professionals can benefit the InfoSec side, frankly, is around documentation. A lot of times in incident response, you know, they're the first responders. They're trying to stop the bad guy. They're not necessarily thinking about building out a defensible, repeatable model. at least not to the extent, the eDiscovery practice focuses on. So, you marry those two up, that situational awareness, the process and methodology, and I think net, you end up with a stronger, more complete and defensible eDiscovery program.
Thanks, Ron. How about the view of the people themselves in the teams? How do they view the situation? Do you think they see the benefits, or has there been any resistance to that merging that you've seen?
I think in our case, the incident response and information security professionals kind of added on eDiscovery. So they started with that core expertise and they built towards eDiscovery. I haven't seen it as much the other direction, although it makes sense that you go.
Oh, I think we may. Winston, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay, so it's not my network. It seems like we've lost Ron. Maybe you'd like to kind of pick it up on your views as well.
Yeah, it looks like Ron may be back.
Ron, sorry, we lost you there a minute.
I'm going to blame the internet connection in Texas.
Okay.
Our pipes froze and then our internet froze.
It's a slow thaw then. Sorry, do you want to continue?
I don't know where I left off. Sorry.
I think you were saying your folks moved from IR and cyber into ED, but you haven't seen it the other way around.
I just haven't seen that, but it makes sense that you could evolve either direction. I think, from my perspective, I like the idea of merging the two together. I think they're highly complementary skill sets. My one, where we're focusing right now in improvement, for example, is really around less emphasis on the forensic side of things and more about surgical collection. So we're spending less time, searching for needles. I don't need more hay right now. Those needles are expensive to find. So I think that's kind of the friction right now is the IR folks, they want to grab everything and toss it over the fence. And so now we're working towards really fine tuning our approach so that we're nimble and we're not over collecting. So just optimizing, these two practices.
Okay, thanks very much, Ron. We talked a lot there about specific kind of industries, specific technologies, or not only technologies, approaches and terms. Winston, how would you kind of contrast and compare incident response and eDiscovery per se, looking at the kind of definitions and the differences and similarities between them?
Yeah, and so I come at this a little differently from Ron, where CrowdStrike has their own platform and proprietary tools, and have been able to combine this. I mean, out of a sort of historical thing, I remember the good old days of eDiscovery, bad old days, and when I came into it, I clearly sort of realized that there was a sort of choice between eDiscovery, which at the time was actually quite, was stressful. You'd get lawyers, mansplaining Boolean terms to you, telling you what buttons to push, wondering all this kind of stuff. And then, God forbid you search through 10 terabytes of data and one file is, it's inside 2 zip files and doesn't get searched and you're killed. And then, I went into forensics and did a lot of testimony. Where you don't have the deadlines. You have senior partners of law firms, making you a cup of tea so that you can just be completely relaxed before trial. And I remember being asked at trial by some cocky lawyer, a barrister, about what is the meaning of this, of something or other. And I looked the judge in the eye and said with a sort of sneer, I don't know, in the sense of like, what a stupid question. And crowds go berserk, we win the case, blah blah blah. But the ability of forensics was to basically be this sort of godlike persona, while eDiscovery was sort of in the coal mine, digging coal and getting blamed for everything. What's happened with IR is a lot of people went from forensics to IR because it paid better, and there was a big budget for that kind of stuff. But there's been a real flip, and what happens, what I see a lot of, is IR has become the super stressful part of it. You get brought in when something's happened. the time is measured in hours. I mean, if you've got a few days to do analysis, that's great. And the eDiscovery side of life, as it relates to data breaches, cyber events and stuff like that, has been pushed back more to sort of working out what's in the data. So IR is focused on, what did the attackers do? What did they get in? What might they have seen? What data might they have compromised? But not a deep dive into the actual data itself. eDiscovery gets brought in to sort of, well, what's in this data? The IR people have now focused on it. They worked out that this data sets may have been compromised. What's inside there? How bad is it? And while there's an overflow of tools and methodologies, eDiscovery people know the different search tools. That's all useful. It really does boil down to in my mind, IR being a focus on the systems, the infrastructure, the applications, but not so much really what's inside the data. While eDiscovery is still being brought in those cases where, great, we know something's been touched, and there has been this whole flip. So IR professionals, which was seen as the glory boys, you're going to fly a Spitfire, you're going to hunt the Russian hackers and all stuff, has a life expectancy of about 14-15 months. You burn out and you go in-house, or you go into another job, or you beg for your old eDiscovery job back. And this is, it's a real problem. While the eDiscovery people, there's an enormous amount of ability to be creative, to work with lawyers onto what types of search terms. And that's something we may touch upon at the end. The types of searching that's necessary in eDiscovery cases that are part of data breaches is very different. And there's to a degree an enormous amount of creativity. The IR people, most of our work is grey. Most of our work is looking at, did the attackers get in? We think so. Did they steal data? Possibly. What did they steal? It could be this. I mean, it's a big fat bucket of grey in most cases. Now, you might have Falcon installed, and you see everything going out the door, and it's all glorious. But in most cases, it's a big lot of maybe, and then eDiscovery having to come in to sort of go in this big bucket of maybe. What was really there? How bad is it if the attackers got in? And so, in many cases, the IR teams, there is an element of you go in there because you think it's going to be glorious. And instead, there's a lot of hard work, and in a lot of infrastructures, your answer is your biggest challenge is, how do you make maybe into an 18-page report? There's an art form in that, and that's a real issue. While for the eDiscovery teams, a lot of the times when they're reviewing the data that's been affected in a data breach, their findings, their accuracy will be crucial to notification, to regulatory cases, to class action disputes in the US, to be able to say exactly who's had their data lost, what was it, how do we respond to it? So to a degree, there's been a little bit of a flip from IR being the sort of the way of the gods to IR very stressful, and a way of getting beaten up constantly, in the middle of the night when you're working all weekend, and really at the end of the day, your results are kind of grey. So is the differences is many differences, but anyway, hope that's a little bit of a flavour from my side anyway.
It is. How would you describe the core skill sets that people working in either end of those, in incident response versus eDiscovery? What are the key skill sets that people have in each of those buckets?
I'll go first. At the end of the day, it's people skills. And if you want to go far in your career, whether it's eDiscovery or IR, it's really not how can you out-geek the other person. It's, can you put a stressed person, whether it's the lawyer in charge of an eDiscovery in a case, or whether it's a company that's looking at Armageddon, if what looks like happened really has happened, making them calm, making them make the right business decisions, making them breathe, explaining very technical findings back to them. And people have a feeling that, just because it's their network, they understand it. It's akin to talking to somebody who's got a pain in their chest and explaining what they've got. I have no idea how my body works. Most organizations have very little idea how their infrastructure works. Being able to communicate and explain that. Now, I find there's always two tiers of people. There's the tech people who really don't want to have, talk to lawyers and talk to the C-suite. Those people want that career, and there's great jobs for them in IR. Ditto with eDiscovery, but to get to the crucial thing is being able to explain a story, explain what happened, and make people understand what you do. It's all about translation.
Yeah, sorry, Ron. I was just going to say, I often refer to it as the ability to speak human, as well as anything else, and to be able to turn that the tech jargon into real words and language. Ron, what's your view on this?
I was just going to piggyback on Winston. Yes, it's people first. I think next I'd say it's process. It's not tech. It's not the tools. That's an evolving, portfolio of stuff that's interesting, but not, really decisive. And so speaking of the process side of it, we're in the middle of doing kind of a tabletop exercise where we're stepping in excruciating detail through every step of the process as we understand it, from the beginning of an incident or an issue, a claim, lawsuit, regulatory inquiry, whatever, and then walking through every step from identifying things, collecting, processing. And what we're finding, even though we would all kind of collectively, have a lot of experience in the IR to eDiscovery space, there's still a lot that we can improve. So I think just the emphasis on methodology and practice and that continual evolution of how you do things, to me, that's right after people in terms of a successful team. Don't assume you know what you're doing because the landscape may have changed. So we're just investing a ton of time, first in people and then next in the process, what we do.
Yeah, I think just to add a couple of things to that, and trying to provide a different perspective. I think I've always seen what we do broadly falls in that kind of technology spectrum. We are underlying and maybe, it's not all about the geeks, but there's a bit of geek in all of us, I think. Otherwise, we wouldn't necessarily be doing what we're doing successfully. So we always have that bit of geek in us. And there's a broad range of skills and applications that apply across that spectrum. And I think then, I'm not dismissing the people skills. I absolutely agree with Winston. They're important. Ron, I agree, the process side. I just think from an underlying skill set, there are then fundamental differences between some of the core skills that you're looking at in these different aspects. That's more networking, that is more dynamic in terms, and I don't mean that in a negative way, just the type of data you're looking at is dynamic, it's changing, it's log files, it's remnants that are lurking here, there and everywhere on the kind of instant response side. Whereas on the eDiscovery side, the data is more static, it's more known. And going on to what you were saying, Winston, I think eDiscovery is more about what's inside the data effectively, whereas a lot of instant response, what's inside the data is a secondary importance. It's more about what's happening with the data. And
that's why, Phil, I liked adding it together, because my eyes were open recently when we had a particular data custodian in mind. We were aware of a couple data sources that we expected most of the content to be found in. And our folks leveraging things like Active Directory, looking at single sign-on activity, they gave us this 360-degree view of how our custodian was actually interacting in our environment. And it painted a completely different picture than we came in believing. And so I think you're right, that the look on the inside comes once you've identified the data you want to review, but you need those IR forensic skills to make sure that you're actually digging in the right place.
Great. And it looks like Paul has joined us. Paul, can you hear us okay?
I can, yes. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, welcome to the panel. I hope your call went well. We were just saying you're it's a great advert to the responsiveness and the needs of instant response that you had to jump on a call. We're just briefly talking around the differences and similarities between incident response and eDiscovery. We've talked through that, you know, people skills are important. It's not all about the geek, but there's bits of geekiness. Talking about the process and some of the differences between those skill sets. How do you view the difference, the two processes, incident response and eDiscovery, and some of the differences between them?
Yeah, I mean, that the people side of it's really important, actually, because if you're involved in the incident response side of things, that tends to be a very fraught situation. It's a crisis, basically, if you're straight up on the IR side, and there's always a situation where you have very limited information. You don't know, at that point, you often don't know what you know. You don't know what you don't know even. You're trying to find out what you might be able to know in the next however long. And so there's always the dynamics of the crisis situation there. The other piece is that fairly often it's a situation where the client's internal security function will be involved in the incident response, but will also be feeling quite sensitive and quite protective because they could potentially be criticized. So you do often have this strange dynamic of you're trying to be sort of independent investigators of what's happened here, working with the internal InfoSec or IT function. And yeah, I have had situations where, to be honest, you know, people in the IT or InfoSec function have been obstructive because they are concerned that you know, they're going to get criticized. They might lose their jobs over whatever has happened. So that people dynamic in that situation is absolutely critical, and being able to navigate that to get to the information that we need to get to is a fundamental skill on the IR side.
Great. So it's clear from what we're saying is the technologies or the skill sets that you need between incident response and eDiscovery. There are a lot of similarities between them. A lot of it isn't about the tech skills, it's about the people skills, it's about the process skills, but there is an element there that is different and it needs to be addressed. So Ron, if you were looking to kind of be a career coach, you're my career coach. You're sitting as I'm working hard on my eDiscovery projects, but I have a yearning to fly Spitfires, in Winston's words, and get into incident response. How would you see the possibility of managing that career transition? What would be your advice and guidance?
Well, I think there's two things. One could be in the context of a matter you're working on in your eDiscovery role, literally partner up, borrow, collaborate with the IR folks, ask them for help on validating custodial interaction with data sources, help them validate where you should be looking. So I think just collaborating with them, leveraging their expertise, you're going to establish the connections and you're going to be aware of opportunities. So I think the partnership angle will open a lot of doors. The other area that I've seen is in this whole space, there's a need for documentation, whether it's someone writing down a data retention policy. I mean, nobody wakes up wanting to do that. A lot of companies, don't have them or they're really old. I do think it's not sexy, but volunteering to help document stuff that we all know needs to be documented gives you another inroad to take something off their plate. But in the course of doing that, build those relationships and frankly, get insight into their process. So I don't think it's hard to, engender that cooperation and those interactions. You have to just seek it out.
Winston, what's your view on the way to transition from eDiscovery towards incident response? Winston, I think you're on mute.
Rookie error. I have my kids in the other room playing video games. So if you start hearing shooting and screaming, it's just the corruption of our youth. Yeah, what do I think? Any IR team is going to have a bunch of different people doing different things. And if I was an eDiscovery person, and I've worked with a lot of eDiscovery people, as partners, you look at an IR team, you've got super technical people, and in IR that's really moving into very, very specific expertise, cloud, AWS, good old-fashioned sort of IT admin people, applications. That stuff is really hard to learn. You got to be already into that or have that experience or something like that. You can't fake it till you make it. And those are the people that you'll be, that are going to be digging deep into certain parts of the case. But there's also going to be, I mean, a huge requirement for people who can talk to, as I said, explain stuff to lawyers, explain stuff to clients, project manage massive millions of moving parts. And eDiscovery people, there's no such thing as just an eDiscovery person. There's the super tech, there's the one who's tinkering and helping things through, there's the relativity geek, but then there's also the project manager and the person who has that ability to explain things and keep things rolling. So I'd say if you're interested in moving into IR, don't try and out geek the geeks. Unless you're already there, or you've come from IT admin, you've moved into eDiscovery or something like that, you're in an area where there's some uber geeky type of people. But at the same time, you're in an area where the majority of the people in the team, what's the joke? How do you say an outgoing IT admin is a person who looks at the other person's shoes? I mean, you've got some people who are very, gauche and not able to communicate. So, like with any career prospect, it's look at what you've got that's unique. If it's a knowledge of a certain IT platform or something like that, push it, because you're always going to be needed. But if your expertise is really project management, but understanding this and working in a legal environment, then for God's sake, that's your skill. That's what you stick on your, that's what you put at the top of your resume and go into IR, because those skills are absolutely needed, as long as you can cross a certain threshold of technical expertise or technical ability. You can turn on a computer without requiring help desk.
Ron, have you seen, you talked about your team being a kind of joint team to do the same. What's been, if you were speaking to them, and I guess I should have maybe asked you to prep this beforehand, so I apologize. What do you think they would have said has been, the best way to kind of learn those other skills?
So I would say, so we're coming at it from a different perspective. So it's really our incident response team kind of learning the eDiscovery skills. And I think for them, it's frankly moving, as Winston alluded, from this posture of understanding what's happening to the data and getting better insight into understanding what's in the data. And we have to be economical about it. And I think that's been a learning area for us, is around, we've got to not just collect a bunch of stuff, we've got to identify things very efficiently and be very economical about who we're asking to review and how much content we're feeding them. So it's really kind of moving from that situational awareness to the deep understanding of the issues. And, there's a lot of room for improvement. Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be learned from either side of the fence going either way, and like you said earlier, the benefits you see of that is immense when you put them together. I think we do need to be careful, though, that there are specific kind of skill sets, specific processes that are involved in IR, and you can't simply do an IR just because you are an ED professional. And I think it's important to recognize that, and there are risks associated with that, trying to run before you can walk, making sure you do understand that. So I think, if someone was looking for that transition, I think, the advice Winston gave would be really, really apt for that. Looking at where you make a difference and where you can be additive to it and not trying to out-geek the geek. I think eventually you are going to have to learn new geek skills and new tech skills to really get deep in that, and they are important. And I don't think we should think just because we know one process, we instantly know the other, just like how an incident response professional would probably make a complete hash of an eDiscovery process. It's just a different kind of skill set, different approach in a related area. Kind of moving on to our next topic, and I'm going to skip the benefits of it because I think we've covered those. Paul, there are a lot of moving parts when it comes to responding to data breaches. What are the critical issues that an eDiscovery professional needs to be aware of when they're working on projects that follow or involve those breaches?
Thanks, Phil. And this actually runs on quite neatly, because we've just touched on sort of a couple of these issues. And the first thing I would say is really being aware of what the work streams are and exactly what you are working on at any given time, and and understanding how that can shift over time. Because there isn't necessarily a bright line between we're in incident response mode now, and now we're doing an eDiscovery or litigation exercise or regulatory investigation. Sometimes there will be a bright line between the two, but that's probably relatively rare. So there is usually overlap between sort of the investigation phase of incident response. So you've probably done the initial manic crisis management piece. The forensics guys are, it's in ongoing investigation as to what happened, but the crisis mode has passed. By that point, regulatory notifications have probably been done. You may have notified data subjects. You may have threatened claims. You may be trying to do things like identify whether you should be notifying data subjects. And the threshold test there is obviously higher than regulatory notification. You may be doing things like trying to identify what PII is in the potentially compromised data set. And so there are a whole load of, and in that situation, you may have threatened litigation already. You may have pre-action disclosure requests coming in if you've notified data subjects and class action lawyers have jumped on the bandwagon. So really understanding what those different work streams are, understanding what it is that you are working on, and how that interrelates with the other work streams that are running and how they can shift is actually really, really important. And making sure that you have the right information to be able to do what you're, and the right tools, frankly, to be able to do what you're working on at any given time. The other key thing is that in any data breach scenario or the work that follows that, you are more likely than not working in a situation of degrees of certainty or degrees of confidence that something has happened or hasn't happened, and the extent to which you can prove that, disprove that, and what that then means in terms of the implication for the following work streams, the next steps in the investigation, regulatory investigation, litigation that happens. So having that mindset and that constant, almost sort of second guessing or mentally checking whether the assumptions that you're working under are still valid is really, really important. And because it impacts things down the line in strange ways. And so having that information sharing attitude and that, okay, these are the assumptions we're working on. There's still some forensic investigation going on. The assumptions mean we're doing X in terms of pre-action discovery or whatever, or trying to identify PII. Something happens over there on the investigation that changes our assumptions, and that then changes what we need to do on whichever phase is the more eDiscovery focused phase. And so it's a bit of a different mindset, I think, to that more straightforward eDiscovery in a dispute litigation arbitration type situation. I referred briefly to identifying PII. I mean, that's a bit of a nightmare in itself. And there are specific technologies being developed now which are built from the ground up to actually try and identify PII in data sets. Because there are some in the industry who take the view that picking up relativity and bolting on certain additional tools and things on the side just don't provide a high enough degree of certainty. So understanding if you're in that area, really understanding, well, what is the potential PI we've got here? Double checking that, sanity checking it, and understanding what then are the tools that you should be using to identify that is really important, because PII can get complicated. It's difficult to identify. A credit card number isn't hard because you can set up searches for 16 digits together or 4 sets of 4 digits together separated by a hyphen or a space, or pick up Amex because they just want to be difficult, do 15-digit numbers. That's not difficult. Medical data can be much more difficult. Ethnicity data, sensitive data for PII purposes, is an awful lot more difficult. So really understanding what you're looking for, what the tools are available for that, and thinking creatively, I think it is absolutely key when you're on that side of a project.
Winston, anything to add to that on this area?
I would just say it's as difficult as Paul makes it sound. I mean, it's even more difficult because I'm just looking at the proliferation of all these different cloud services folks have. When I look at my single sign-on screen, when I started a year ago, there may have been, 10 different services. Now, I mean, I've got to scroll. And so imagine trying to find PII or finding anything, and you're not searching in email, you're not searching in backups, you're searching across every single cloud service where people have a chat feature or can upload files. So just to your earlier points around just the overlap, because there's so many different vectors, avenues, tools, you can imagine people with different skills across that spectrum from incident response to eDiscovery. There's a place for them. So I think Winston nailed it. You know, you've got to have a degree of technical acumen, but fundamentally, it's your people skills, it's your ability to communicate, and you'll be able to find an opportunity to fit in and provide real value.
Right. I just want to kind of say to the whole audience, we do have time left over for questions at the end of this event. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat message, and we do have time set to answer them. Before we get to that, there are a lot of folks on the call today who are mainly or primarily in the kind of ED space, potentially interested in getting into cyber. Starting with you, Winston, what would be your one tip for an ED professional considering getting into cyber? How would you advise them?
Yeah, I mean, stay awake for 3 days and see how great the idea looks. When you haven't had sleep for 3 days, might be an interesting start to your job hunt. Or your thoughts of doing it. Also, I think just sort of why, think very clearly what's attracting you. I mean, some of the things that are sort of cool and sexy, we are rarely brought in to actually find out who did it, other than the implications it could have towards the possibility of loss or bad things happening to the data. It's not like you're going to be flying to the Ukraine and putting Yuri in prison or something like that. It's not that kind of movie thing. It's what interests you. Is it because it's cutting edge? Is it because it's because there's more money? I mean, there's a reason there's more money in IR than ED, and that's because it's grueling and the life expectancy is short. But at the same time, I would say that you go up in the sort of food chain. You are seeing the C-suite at its worst moments, the possibility of talking at a higher level and seeing the corporate world, Western capitalism crumbling, is an exciting thing to do. But though, if those are your reasons, or the ability to just the constant need, and I think it was Ron who said that, just constantly having to be smarter than the attackers, constantly refreshing. If you love technology and you love the fact that in a month's time everything you knew will be different and gone and irrelevant, as opposed to reading the Relativity Today or something, it's just not a lot is changing in that part of the world, as opposed to the attack vectors and the methodologies that attackers are using and the need to absorb all this information. If that excites you and that you just love that, then it's a great place to be. But it's not for the timid or weak-hearted.
Okay, thanks, Winston. Paul, what would your piece of advice be to said professional?
I would say, and you're following on from what Winston said, that part of working out what interests you, be curious. So when something's in the media about an attack that's happened, dig into that. Yeah, you'll probably see something about it in the mainstream media, then move a bit more into the sort of more specialist tech and cyber media, then start looking up the terms that they used about what the attack was, etc. Really start digging into that. And the other side of be curious is kind of when I started poking around some of this when I was a kid, as a teenager, is that attitude of, oh, let's poke something and see what happens, see if I can break it, without doing anything illegal, obviously. Download Kali Linux or something like that, main operating system that penetration testers use. There's plenty of tutorials online about how to get started in that and what some of the tools do. Start actually engaging with that and seeing what the possibilities are, seeing what takes your fancy, and see if you do enjoy the more technical side of it, and if so, what. And see where that then takes you in terms of what interests you and how you can potentially marry that up with existing ED expertise.
Thanks, Paul. Ron, finally to you.
Sure. So I already mentioned, I think one technique would just be to partner with them, learn what they do now in the context of a matter you're already working on, get their expertise. I guess the other tip Waiver of attorney-client privilege has been in the news recently in the IR context. And so I do think it presents a unique opportunity for folks on the legal or eDiscovery teams to step in and help their IR friends better document their process and look for opportunities to strengthen attorney-client privilege. So we went through that exercise, and I can just say it took about a month of collaboration, and I got a much clearer insight into the day-to-day life of what our IR team does. So that might be a way to get the sneak preview that Winston and Paul are talking about, but in a context of delivering some immediate value, given the fact that there's real risk around privilege waiver these days.
Just for God's sake, don't go to law school as a quick way of getting into IR. That would be my 2 cents.
I think just building on what everyone says. I mean, I would think, and kind of similar to what you said just then, Winston. I don't think you can move just by studying a course or a book and suddenly consider yourself or think that you are an expert in a different space. It's almost like a lifestyle, a career, a real transition between the two based on the pressures and the processes involved. So I think you do need to be prepared for it. There is some study that you would need to do. There are technical skills you do need to gain to do it. But it's not just I go on a course and all of a sudden I'm got this qualification and I can practice and I'm the next best thing. So I think that would be my word of caution is make sure you know what you're going into and embrace it. I guess. We've now got some time for some questions before we end. Brian, have we got any questions? I don't think we do we?
We do not. I'm not sure if people are just being shy, or if the panel they're stunned. Everyone's answered every single question. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, because we'd love to throw them out to the group.
Thanks, Brian. Well, I'll ask one of each panelist, and again, I'm just conscious of time. We don't have an awful lot of time. You must have experienced the bad in your careers as well, and the horror stories. Tell us about a horror story you've experienced when working in this field. Ron, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, it rhymes with spoliation. You're under the gun and you think you've done everything, and then at the worst possible moment, you found out you didn't look in all the right places, or you're challenged. And you really can't go back and retrace your steps. There's no breadcrumb trail through the forest. And so I think, having lived through a couple of those and survived them, I've come to appreciate the more mundane aspects of documentation and process, so that even if you made some decisions that later can be questioned, you can at least explain it and ultimately show that your approach was reasonable. And I think if you're reasonable, you usually survive, spoliation challenges and other things. So I just avoid spoliation.
Thanks, Ron. Winston, how about yourself?
I just don't know. It's hard because in instant response, it's already a nightmare. It's already somebody's worst time. It's really, the question is better sort of, what's your best nightmare? What's your happiest nightmare that you've had? The nightmare is caused by the attacker. And, as the reference to spoliation is, the best you can have, the best result is when everything works and it's only a disaster. Things get worse when people have added to it. But we've had great help from IT, the client's IT. We've had client IT hiding stuff from us. That's probably, I haven't, the irony at the end of the day from where we sit is that we know the attacker better than we know the client. We do a lot of ransomware. We deal with the same ransomware attackers again and again. I will know our client. They will call on a Friday night. That's the first time I've ever spoken to them. And then on Saturday, they're yelling at me. The ransomware attacker is somebody or group that we've dealt with for months. we tend to, there's an element of trust there. There's an element of stuff there. It's always sort of ironic to me when people say, how can you trust ransomware attackers? And, in about 750 cases, we have not yet been stiffed by a ransomware attacker. We've been lucky, we do our intelligence. However, there is a significant percentage of clients who have not paid their invoices or have quibbled about stuff or have, I totally, at the time I signed that, SOW, yeah. But now that I think about it, I think you were kind of screwing us on your budget, now that the fire's been put out, how about we pay half of it? So yeah, what's the nightmare? The nightmare is the client, or can be the client. But God bless them if it wasn't for, it's like the law. If it wasn't for the clients, whether it's we
wouldn't have a job.
Yeah, that's it.
Perfect. Paul.
So
I see we've got a question, Brian. I'm just going to kind of get Paul's.
Oh, sorry. Yes, please. I've got two, so we'll go with Paul.
I see them first. Coming in now. Perfect. Paul, quickly, any nightmare stories?
Super quickly. I mean, the worst nightmare one was probably one that was just absolutely brutal in terms of hours, and of course came in just before Easter weekend a few years ago, and just every day, midnight 2 a.m. finishes 7 a.m. starts all over Easter weekend and everything for 2 weeks. But actually, it was fun as well because they were a good client to work with, and it was managed, and they really had that feeling of help. This is completely outside of what we deal with. Never had anything like this before. Please, can you get us out of this massive hole? Yeah. And actually the feeling, yes, in terms of the sheer amount of work needed to do that, but actually the feeling of achievement after that and the client actually recognizing the hard work done was really valuable, actually.
Okay. Well, let's quickly turn to the questions. I'm very, very conscious of time. Melina, thank you very much for your question. Given the introduction of everything remote in this climate, what are the top 3 tips you would give a client in order to avoid future cybersec incidents and data breaches? Ron, can I ask you to take that one?
Sure. I mean, so things like 2-factor authentication, single sign-on services, just being mindful of not clicking on links from places you don't recognize. I mean, it's kind of basic good data hygiene. I think Winston may have alluded to it earlier. Or it could have been Paul. A lot of the attacks are coming in, they're non-technical. They're social engineering or they're phishing. It's just tricking the humans into making an easy mistake. So I think we've all got to be a little skeptical, but probably 2-factor authentication is an easy one that everybody should be doing.
Okay, thanks, Ron. And then we've also got a question from James McGregor. What kind of due diligence consumers do when selecting an IR expert? Is it safe to choose a consultancy firm with ties to Russia, North Korea, etc.? If not, how can you confirm these ties don't exist? Paul, can I turn to you for that one?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, in terms of consultancy firms with ties to jurisdictions like that, I mean, yes, there are some who have ties to Russia. They're based out of Russia. Russia has its own infosec and cybersecurity industry, obviously. I mean, when I'm instructing IR or IR forensic cybersecurity consultants on matters, it really is a combination of what do I know about their expertise already, and any specific issues which might relate to this particular incident. For example, if early indication is that it might be nation state related, there are certain firms I will go to because they are more experienced in dealing with nation state type attacks than others. So it really is who's got the right expertise in the area, acknowledging that it's very early days and you might not know at that point.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Paul. And I'm afraid we haven't got a chance now to answer the last question. Sorry, David. We'll have to leave thoughts on cyber insurance to another day because I'm sure that's a topic in its own right. I just want to thank my fellow panelists, Winston, Ron, and Paul, especially Paul, given you've had to be dashing in and out to deal with your new case. Claire, over to you to close for the afternoon.
Thank you, Phil, and thanks to everyone that's joined the session today. It's fantastic to see so many of you here. I hope you all found it as enlightening and inspiring and overall entertaining as I did. I'm going to go away and brush up on my geek skills now. You've inspired me to do that. On behalf of all the ACEDS board, I'd like to thank Phil for your fantastic moderating skills as ever.
Thank you.
Ron and Winston and Paul, thank you so much for your insights and overall your honesty as well. It's been fantastic. Your time and your support of ACEDS is really appreciated. Please look out for our next events and our vlog series, which we're going to be publicising over the next few months. And if you have any questions about today's discussion or ACEDS in general, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the other board members. We look forward to seeing you all soon, hopefully in person before long, and have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.